Hello, welcome to the Augmentation of Man with Kent and Renee Miller. Today, we've got a very interesting subject. It's part one of a two-part series.
And today is called a correction in time, but we are going to define time, the meaning, and why we as humans have gotten off on our timeline. It's going to be quite interesting.
It is very interesting because our perception of time is different than the universal perception of time. And our timeline is not in sync. It's not where it should be. And we are coming to the end of a cycle where a recorrection has to occur to put us back on the natural timeline. And so we're going to plug into that.
And the information this comes from the higher self, which comes from the Creator. And through the higher self and the helpers, we get this information.
Through the guides.
The helpers, with the guides are the helpers.
Yes. And so Kent goes into a deep meditation and he is able to hear telepathic communication and see visions. And this is the information that we bring forward. So do you want to start with a definition of time?
Define time. We figured we had to define time before we talked about time. It's where all events take place in the first three dimensions of space. It is the movement of energy, and mass is energy, of course.
So our physical bodies moving create events.
Through space and the perceived pause between the events. So time is a narrative of events.
And so we also have to discuss briefly universal laws, which establish specific learning to be accomplished within a larger cycle. So everything is cyclic, and it all falls back on the movement of planets in their orbits that create smaller to ever greater cycles of what we would call time. And so the learning cycles are attached to the larger cycles. We've been in a very long period of perceptual learning, and we have gotten off the correct timeline.
Which is the time continuum.
Mm-hmm.
That is the original timeline, time-space continuum. And we have gotten off into a subtime. Now remember when I first said that time is the narrative of events. That's going to be important to remember as we're speaking.
And time does not fall on a linear, an absolute straight path,
No.
but it's more of a curved, and we'll show you. So, we've got a diagram. It's diagram. More of a curvature.
Okay, so to discuss now how time came about, how our time, the human time, came about. So
the variance in time.
Right.
So thousands of years ago, there were other races of beings here on this planet. And we're being told by our spiritual guides that Earth is a lab. So there have been other beings from other locations in the universe that have come here over long periods of time that are using Earth as a laboratory. And we are part of that experiment.
Yes. Now, tradition past shows that early Earthlings were used as not slaves. I don't like to use the word slaves.
Proletarians.
Tools. Yeah, proletarians.
We were the workforce.
Yeah, we used as a workforce and also to teach.
they were teaching us.
Yeah, we were not teaching them, they were teaching us.
Right. And we also were part of an experiment where other races did not have written documentation of their earliest points in their own history and how they came to naturally evolve. So they wanted to set up an experiment to study how civilizations evolve from their earliest, most primal state to more conscious and intellectually advanced societies. And so we're a part of a two-part experiment. Is one, a part of that, how evolution takes place, but two, also that they needed a proletarian race to help them with the mining operations going on here on Earth.
And this is why the native people said these are our brothers and sisters who brought knowledge and understanding at this time, began bringing knowledge and understanding.
They were also our teachers. So yeah. When you look back at these ancient oral traditions, and there's paintings and depictions of these other beings that were here, and they were giving us knowledge. They were helping to speed up our evolutionary process in some respects by teaching us things like how to farm. They were teaching us astronomy. That's how ancient civilizations came to understand those planets that existed out there, even though they did not have telescopes.
Yeah, so at some point thousands of years ago, man became arrogant and the ego took over.
And this is where our deviation in time really began.
And that's where it comes off, our sub-timeline comes off of the main timeline at that point. When man becomes arrogant. And when it became arrogant, it began to believe that we, humanity, was the center of the universe. And we were all things, that God chose us and there was no other beings within the universe. Our arrogance began to grow.
And we were told that at that time, these other beings that were here decided to just pull back. So they stopped teaching us, and they wanted us to have the time to come to a point where our own humility kicked back in, and that we recognize the value of the learning that they could impart and the knowledge that they could give us. And that has not happened yet.
Yeah, and even in the Quran and the Bible, they try to teach us humility then. They try to intercede then. And man was still not willing to bring back humility in their profile. They were still being arrogant and egotistical. And you can look back and see the history of humanity where that played in. So,
and that set forth the multiple paths for misperceptions that just continued to get further and further away from the truth, leading up to this point in time. So even the church got involved way back in the day, that latched onto the belief, promoting that humans were the center of all of creation, that we were the darling of the Creator, that everything rotated around the earth, including our sun. So there were multiple misperceptions that evolved out of that original egotistical idea that we were the center of the universe.
So at that time we came to think the earth was flat. We think that everything rotated around the earth was the center of the universe. We were the only intelligent beings in all of the universe, and we had dominion over all things. So our misperceptions have led many ways.
Yes. These initial misunderstandings altered our timeline. It was the original deviation in time, creating a variance in time in the timeline, and creating alternate learning events or events that really didn't follow the true learning. So what has happened is that we've reached this culmination of this fork in the road where we've been on a variance of time and a variance of true learning. And we are at the culmination of all those misperceptions that began way back thousands of years ago. And before the next cycle that is a higher cycle of learning can occur, a conceptual learning, our understanding has to go through a correction so that we come to a greater understanding of what the truth really is. And now we are entering that period of time where the truth is coming out and our understanding has to be corrected.
Yeah, so correctional behavior occurs on understanding. We cannot correct the discourse of understanding. So it has more, it's the beginning of this cycle where humanity got off on the arrogance and their own understanding. If they were to try to correct it, then it would have put a break or a severe malfunction in the timeline that was occurring.
And so when you say they, you're talking about the higher entities that are kind of in control of some of the parameters of our learning.
Right. They're basically control all of our learning right now, up to this point.
Let me go over to a diagram that we drew up. Gives you a little better idea. Okay.
At the very beginning, that's the beginning, right?
This is going back thousands of years ago.
Yeah,
okay.
Right.
And this is the beginning down here.
No, yeah, that's the beginning of the time-space continuum.
And
now
so
if you go up to the line,
if we follow this, this is the natural learning or timeline.
Yeah.
And then Kent's
you go
going.
There is where humanity became arrogant in their own time.
This is where our arrogance and thinking we're the center of the universe and all the other misperceptions that led off of that natural timeline.
If they were to break it, knowing man was getting off, and they were to break it right here or right there, it would have caused malfunction, many malfunctioning things within the timeline itself. So they have to let it continue up and have it disseminate and then create its own ending from its own weight down back to the timeline.
Where it rejoins the natural timeline and learning events.
Yeah.
And so
and the new cycle begins here.
Yeah.
So we have just now coming down into the natural timeline.
So it looks like we're probably right around here in this.
Yes.
And what we're seeing is an acceleration of events.
They had to extend it out so it wouldn't.
Yes. So the way it was explained to us is that they could not, as soon as we took this wrong path of thinking that we were the most intelligent beings in the universe and that we were the center of the universe, they could not correct it here because it would have caused a lot of malfunctions in our understanding and our thinking process. They had to allow us the time to correct our own understanding through the events that played out as a result of cause and effect.
Right.
But in doing so, they had to extend the timeline. So you see this long period of time of thousands of years before we come to a point where we have to correct our thinking, and our own timeline has to rejoin the natural timeline for the experiences and the learning and the understanding that we should have had. And we're going to have to pick up from here. before the start of a new cycle begins, represented by this line here. So our correction and understanding has to take place before the new cycle, which is a higher conceptual learning. We're going to take off from here. And actually, this will probably be a much steeper climb, going up like that, probably.
And hopefully that is a curvature, that natural timeline, but hopefully we learn before the new event cycle.
And so this timeline is a holder of events. It is a narrative of events, is the way they worded it.
Yeah.
And it has to follow universal laws and concepts related to the laws. So it's all about our learning. And that's been set out for us within this particular learning cycle. However, we've missed a lot of the learning that was necessary because we took this deviated path. And this really reminds me of the Hopi prophecy rock.
The Zuni and the Hopi, yes.
Where they talk about man getting off of this path, off the true path, the straight and correct path, although it's not completely straight, there's a curvature to it. But then here, you know, this is represented by these incorrect pathways that we've taken where misperceptions, they just don't hold up. And once we have the truth will bring us to a higher vibration, and it holds up under the weight of future events.
Yeah, and you look at history of humankind, going back a few thousand years or so, and it's all about the arrogance and the ego of fighting and taking another's land, and this is mine, it's not yours. And it's totally wrong the way humanity,
the wars, everything has been spawned off of that initial break and the timeline that should have occurred, and the natural events that should have occurred to create a more accelerated evolution in our understanding.
Yeah, you see why I said they cannot create, connect, or cannot correct a discourse of understanding. It will cause multiple malfunctions within the time-space continuum.
Which we don't really understand.
Which we don't understand.
We just have to take their word for it. Our correctional behavior occurs on understanding. So, for example, when we realize how much we've polluted the world, that all comes back to pollute us, and then we start having health problems.
Yeah, like the Australian boomerang.
Yeah, we go down these paths thinking that we can control everything about this earth, and we can't. And what eventually happens is we create our own events for learning that boomerang back to us, that tell us, no, you cannot do that. And this is the reason why. Once the understanding is gained, then we correct our behavior naturally. Just to reiterate what our guides had to say, and this is a direct quote from them. Keep to the truth. Vibrational understandings cannot be set in one lifetime. That's why we have reincarnation. Correctional behavior occurs on understanding. We cannot correct a discourse of understanding. Multiple malfunctions will occur. Multiple discourses will make this understanding into a non-truth. What you see is not an understanding. It is a perception of societal realities that has pervaded the complexity of understanding and are not universal in nature. So we probably should kind of digest this a little bit and give a more
comprehensive,
a more digested version of this, because the language is a little different than what most people are used to. So they're saying that our reality today is not based in a true reality. Our perception is really off, and it is a reflection of the what the society has decided to believe
in its own timeline, right?
and
Remember, we
it's
created
based
our
on
own timeline, which is not the true timeline which humanity was supposed to be on.
yeah, and it's all related to events and understanding. So this is not aligned to universal laws and concepts related to the laws. So there's universal laws that are established, and our job is to learn the conceptual understanding of why the law is there. To correct your core response to others, simplicity is the key.
And they keep telling me, ever since I began meditation, 2007, simplicity is the key to all understanding. We didn't understand it then, but we do now.
Yeah, and understanding of simple tasks lead to a higher vibrational level and understanding of multiple tasks. And I can say for myself is that, when we first start reading these messages, like I said, they're not given in a manner that we speak. We had a friend who said, why do they talk to you that way? Why can't they just talk to you in simple way like we talk? And it gave me pause, because I guess I assumed that the higher beings talk to everybody that way. Not everybody. They don't talk to everybody. They talk to a select few that want to learn and share the information. And I just assumed that that was the case. So one day I finally asked when Kent was in meditation, and the answer I got was, because we knew you would involve the time necessary to decipher it. So
to learn.
So basically they knew I would do it.
Well, they knew we would.
Yes,
do it.
but
Yeah.
I will do the deciphering, but then I come back to Kent and he taps into his higher self and he makes corrections. So he does the editing of what I thought I understood, and he does the editing of that.
So we work as a team.
Yeah. So the deviation in our understanding created a deviation in events that we created that had to follow its own timeline and had to be extended to allow for our natural inquisitiveness to come to an understanding of what the truth really is.
So along this alternate timeline that we have been in, we have come to discover that the world is not flat. And we are not the center of the universe, and the sun does not evolve or rotate around us, but that Earth rotates around the sun.
So what we're going to do is just give you kind of an example of some of the corrections that have taken place. This doesn't mean it includes all of them, and certainly we're still at this zenith point of our misperceptions. So we still have a lot of correction to make in our understanding.
Yeah. And Aristotle, many have heard of Aristotle, introduced the belief that the sun and planets rotate around the Earth. And this belief from Aristotle was carried for over 1,000 years. People believe that.
Yeah, it pervaded society. And so once you have a misperception that pervades society, it takes a long time to rewrite the truth over that. So the church seized on this idea and promoted humanity as being the only and most intelligent life form in the universe, and that we were the focal point of God's attention, and that we had dominion over the earth to rule all things. And this thought has evolved to today, and our thinking today, where we still think we can control everything. And that is exhibited in our use of like pesticides and herbicides. And even one day there was, Kent was meditating and there was this noise outside, and the guide came through. It happened to be a leaf blower. So all this noise being created by somebody using a leaf blower, the guide came through and said, only on Earth do beings clean the land.
Yeah.
So that was kind of interesting.
So in 1515, Nicholas Copernicus, that's an unusual word. Copernicus introduced the thought that Earth, like Venus, must rotate around the sun. Well, he did not publish his theory until right before his death. And in 1543, for fear of being charged with heresy,
and then we had Giordano Bruno, who was burned at the stake for teaching the same thing. And other, it was that and other so-called heretical teachings.
This idea took over 100 years.
Yeah,
begin to spread,
because people, the thought, the revolutionary thinkers of the time could not express their findings.
No.
That they were seeing through their own eyes and observations with the use of telescopes, because they would be persecuted for heresy for saying that the Earth was not the center of the universe.
So in 1610, Galileo witnessed Jupiter's moons rotating around Jupiter, and that Venus orbited around the sun, supporting Copernicus's theory. Copernicus, I like Copernicus, Copernicus, which landed him in house arrest for some time and had been tried for heresy imposed by the Roman inquisitors.
Okay. So about the same time, Johannes Kepler, a German mathematician, published a series of laws and mathematical equations that accurately describe the rotations of the planets around the sun, and which is so accurate that is still being used today. So this took place over, several hundred years. It took 1,000 years of this misperception to completely pervade society, and then it took hundreds of years to
finally lock yourself in.
Finally reverse that thought process and come to a greater understanding of what the truth really is. So that's just an example of some of the thought processes that have been corrected over this sub-timeline that we corrected through these misperceptions.
So it's a correction in time, and understanding has to come before this next cycle starts.
Mm-hmm.
And so a big part of that correction will be disclosed, supposedly disclosed this year, midsummer, approximately around June. Mm-hmm. We'll see.
With the stimulus bill that was passed in December of 2020, somebody slipped in at the last minute this mandate to disclose the UFO activity. And I think that was through the Navy, I want to say. I may be somewhat off on that, but so that disclosure is mandated to occur by June. So this will begin the process of some of this other correction in our perception that needs to take place. And I think that humanity, for the most part, is pretty much accepting the fact that there are other beings out there and that we are not the most intellectual of them. Yeah, so that is for sure.
We have come to the end of this grand cycle, coming back into the natural timeline of the universal timeline. So understanding the truth now must come to the point of learning what this natural cycle is about and what truth is about.
And it's not just truth. We could be given the truth but not understand it.
We have to have the universal laws. We start learning the universal laws, which
Right, but
far beyond our understanding right now.
But what they're saying is that they could give us the truth, but if we don't understand it,
Yeah,
it's not going to
it's
make
not
a
gonna make a
difference.
difference.
So we have to come to an understanding of these truths that should have taken place over this past learning cycle and this past timeline that did not occur because we took this deviant timeline. And we have to, there's going to be an acceleration of learning at this period of
Once
time.
we understand this truth, we will be ready for a conceptual learning. That's where conceptual learning actually begins.
But we have to come to completion of this perceptual learning period that is now coming to a close. This learning and understanding of truth must come forward before the next cycle begins, and a magnification of events is occurring now. There's more information that we have yet to decipher. There's something about a quasar having some effect over this process.
And we're not sure what effect the quasar, which was very powerful, how it affects all events. If it does, we've got more research to do.
So this is a process of deciphering the messages, and that will come in with the next video. We're going to have 2 in this series, and the object here today is to deliver the basics in this understanding.
Introduce you to this time frame that we have been in for thousands of years.
Yes. And then the next video, we're going to get into a little more depth. So
we're going to try to, hopefully they'll teach us that we can teach in a simple term that you can understand.
Yes. That we can understand.
There's no use teaching it if we don't understand it.
Right.
So we have to understand it and be able to teach it in terms that you can understand.
Yes, and going back to the June disclosure, UFO disclosure, I think that it ties in with the fact that our guides really wanted us to promote the second book, The Acquiescence of Humanity. This is bringing humanity back into the universal neighborhood and the universal connections, where we will once again have communications with these other beings. We will be given new and higher information, new technology, new medical advances.
Technology that be used for the betterment of humankind, not for weaponry.
And not for personal advancement.
Right.
And so we urge you, if you don't have a copy of this book, it is available on Amazon. You will not necessarily find it under Kent and Renee Miller as the authors, although I think it'll get you there. But the true authors are the ancients and professors of higher realms of understanding. And we've just added our kind of a synopsis to each section so that it helps the reader to understand.
As we understand, hopefully.
So we hope you've enjoyed this video today. We look forward to you joining us with the next video, which will be even more interesting, I believe.
Hopefully, as we find out from our research what many things mean that we can't quite comprehend yet.
And further guidance. So that means you have to go back into meditation.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us. And as always, peace be with you on your journey to enlightenment. Don't forget to subscribe. And one more note, we've gone off Facebook because we believe that we should not endorse an organization that controls free speech.
That's what this is all about. I was trying to teach you what we know and you teaching us what you know. It's exchange of information through humanity that can correct all of humanity.
Yes. And really, it should be up to each one of us to find what the truth is, if only we'll do the work. And so you can find us on Gab. You can find us on Rumble, on BitChute, and on Brighteon, and of course on YouTube. So thank you for joining us. Take care now. Have a good day.